Welcome back again. So it's time to start setting up the actual game board for tic-tac-toe. I really like this example. There's a lot of neat things going on. So let's go back to our storyboard. And what we want to do is we want to add things that are going to exist in both the iPhone and iPad version. So we need to put those on the storyboard that is for both, right? So instead of the storyboard that's specific to one, we want to use the regular height and then any width. And we're going to start adding things to the storyboard. So you can see it kind of snap back to that view, which we really haven't done much with. And the reason we really haven't worried about laying it out is because it doesn't have enough constraints anyway, right? So even if I tried to make it pretty, it wouldn't look pretty no matter what. What we're going to do is we're going to start adding some buttons. So I'm just going to drop a button. I'm just going to drop one. I'm going to make changes to it inside my game board. So you can see that it's got a name here inside my game board. And what I want to do is I want to set this to be a custom button with no text on it. And the only thing it's going to have on it is eventually going to be an image. Right now it could start off clear, but that'd actually be kind of a pain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually set it to background image. And it doesn't really matter what I set it to. I could set it to anything. I just kind of want something to make it visible on the screen just so I could see it. And to be honest, the size doesn't really matter either. I'm just going to make it about the size, and the location doesn't matter, right? I just want to make sure I've got a button on here that I can play with. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding constraints to this guy. I'm going to add these constraints in the storyboard that applies to everything. Our strategy is just that we're going to take up the game board with a 3x3 grid with no margins anywhere, right? So each board's going to hug all the way to the outside. Each button's going to touch the other button. And then what we're going to do is that's going to be the button, but then there's going to be an image on the button that doesn't take up the whole thing. It'll be easier just to do than to talk about. So what I want to do is this is going to be my upper left button. So I'm going to snap it to the upper left with 0, 0 constraints. And I'm just going to add that guy. I'm not actually worried about the fact that it's not there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of it. There was a lot of ways to make copies. I chose to hold down Option and then just drag it over, and that makes a copy of it. And this next button over, what we're going to start doing is we're going to start setting the tags and names on them. So this one's going to have a tag of 1, because this is kind of like button number 1. And I'm going to also make the name over here be 1. And for this last one, I'm going to make its name be 0. And that's just going to help me keep track when I've got a lot of constraints, kind of keep track of what's going on. By the way, if you want a reminder for how that grid works, it's just kind of up here. It's pretty simple. All right, so the second button over, what I wanted to do with him is I wanted to add a constraint to the top and the left again of 0 and 0. That's going to shoot over and hit the other button and then hit the super view when it tries to shoot up. You can also observe these by looking at the ruler area. So you can see that this one has 2 constraints. So it's got top space to super view and then leading space. Then it hits item 0, which is that other button. All right, so we're chugging along. Let's go ahead and make another third button up here. This third button is going to have a tag of 2, tag of 2, a name of 2. So I'm just going to go ahead and change his name to be 2 over here. And the third one is going to have constraints for left, right, and top. And they're all going to be 0. So the nice thing about all these constraints is they're all just 0. So we added those guys. And then, you can observe his constraints as well. So he's got a constraint to super view, and then 1. So that's the first row. And then what I want to do is I want to start kind of mass producing this a little bit more. So I'm going to select all 3. I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to drag those down. And then I'm just going to do it again. And then what I want you to do, I'm not going to wait for you. I'm not going to make you watch me. Go through and change all the tags and all the names. So I'm kind of doing the names first here. And then add all the constraints that you need, right? So it should be fairly obvious what constraints you need. Ultimately, every button needs 4. It needs a top, bottom, a left, and a right. All right, I'll go ahead and let you do that, and I'll pause the video and I'll do the same. All right, once you think you've got them all, it's good to just go through and check, right? So I mean, like the 0 button, you can see that he's got a constraint to the top and to the left, and then he's got a connection to 1 and to 3. And you can go through each of these guys and you can just kind of see that they're all good. So there's top, connection over to 2, back to 0, and then down to 4. And if you've got one of these little grids in front of you, it makes life really easy. going through and checking these things and make sure they're all set. So once we've got their top, bottom, left, right sets, we've got a lot of good things going. The only thing that we want to additionally constrain is we want all of their widths to be the same and all of their heights to be the same. You can actually do this just by selecting them all and then using the menu. So sorry, it's a little off the screen here. So you'll have to say editor, pen, and then widths equally. So it'll add a bunch of width constraints. And then you highlight them all and you say editor, pen, heights equally. So there we did all of their widths and their heights. So now what we should have done is, we don't have enough constraints to be fully defined here, but if we were to actually go over to like our compact view, we can see that it should be fully defined, and they take up all the space. And then same with the iPad view. And just like we've done before, you can actually look at this thing in a preview window, and that's probably a better way to look at it. So here you can see it on a couple different iPhones and then also iPad. And then if I rotate iPad to portrait, you can see it's looking pretty good as well. You could also run it and make sure that that's actually working. So now we've got the views on the screen. Next, what we want to do is we want to actually connect them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my editor assistant to code, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to make some connections. What I want to do with these connections, I want to make sure they happen on both. Turns out it doesn't matter what screen you're on for that, but I'm going to go back to this middle one and go through and make my connections. And we're going to do two things. We're going to make an outlet collection to all the buttons, and then we're also going to add a touch-up inside click listener. So to go ahead and do the outlet, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click drag from one of the buttons, and I'll put it, I'll put it between these guys so I can manage that. I guess I'll put it above this guy. And so I'm going to make an outlet collection called Game Board Buttons. So I'm just going to go ahead and make it plural, and it's an outlet collection, so it means it can have many different things. And if you want to, you can drag from the actual outline, that's fine, or you can drag from the actual view itself. Sometimes it's easier just to drag things over from the outline. So I'm just right-clicking, and then I'm doing a right-click drag to go over this way. If you wanted, you could also do it the other direction. So here I could go from this circle to 5, and then 6, 7, and 8. Once you think you've got all the outlet connections made, the real way to check it, my screen's getting pretty cluttered, is to look at the connections inspector and to actually click on the view controller and then just kind of see if all of these things highlight when you hover it over it. So right now when I hover over game board buttons, you should see all the game board buttons pop up. So it looks like I've got all of those outlet connections made. Next thing I want to do is I want to connect their click listeners. So I want touch up inside click listeners for all of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a little bit of space here. What the heck, I'll put it down right here. So I'm just going to right click drag from one of them. And instead of saying outlet or outlet connection, I'm going to say action. And I'm just going to say pressed game button. I guess I could say game board button, doesn't really matter. And go ahead and add that guy as well. That added it for one of them, and then what you've got to do is you've got to go through and you've got to connect it for all of them. Again, there's so many ways to do these connections. You could do it from the graphical view, you could do it from the code over to the graphical view, you could do it from the code over to the outline. Does not really matter, just so long as all the connections get made. And then once you think you've got all the connections, what you can do is you can actually check them with your connection inspector, right? So if we look and say, hey, what are all the connections for this view controller? And then if I go down to the actions, I can see that it highlights everybody. Once you think you've got that all together, you could also test it if you felt the urge. It's not required. So just kind of like we did before, if we wanted to just kind of print a little message, so we could say pressed board button, and then we could print out the tag, but we'll save that for later. And so we'll just show you how to actually get the tag out. That tag, by the way, is how we're going to track like who just got pressed. So right now it's just saying board button, but of course we want to know who gets pressed, which we'll do later. The other thing we need to do is we need to clean this view up a little bit. So I don't want all these X's to be on here. I'd also like a nice little grid background, but you know what? We'll clean those things up next time. See you then.